World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event.
Great. Hi. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on our respective time zones. I'm Jonna, the session organizer, and I'm very pleased to extend a very warm welcome to you all on this virtual platform of our World Heritage Sustainability team. We have eminent guest experts, speakers, and regional coordinators to the session for a very fruitful discussion and debate. Yesterday, we had our session from the Regional to Global Approach, Case Studies Conclusions 1, which covered Europe, North America, and Arab states. Today, in this Conclusions 2, we will be discussing Asia and the Pacific, Africa region, and the Latin America. I want to welcome especially the case study participants who are our invited attendees for the session. Let me introduce my team. Our session Backstage Brilliance, our rapporteur, Maria Virginia Avila. She is a member of our World Heritage Sustainability team. She is MA in Organizations of Cultural and Creative Sector, graduated in Political Ecology from the Latin American Council of Social Sciences, and she has a degree in Economics Science. She works as an independent consultant in public and private sector, focused on the development of comprehensive management strategies. Her research is oriented to the role of social responsibility from a ecological perspective in the cultural sector. Today, our moderator is Louis Radium Tham. Louis Tham is currently a PhD candidate at the Welsh School of Architecture, Cardiff University, UK. She obtained her MSc in Conservation of Monuments and Sites at the Raymond Lemaire International Center for Conservation at KU Leuven, Belgium. She initially studied building archaeology at the School of Archaeology and Museology at the Peking University. She initiated her career at the Tsinghua Cultural Heritage Conservation Center as a conservation planner. Her PhD research focuses on the sustainable heritage management of early timber architecture in China, exploring an innovative theoretical and strategic framework regarding heritage and sustainability. With no further delay, Louis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jana. Welcome everyone to our from regional to the global approach case studies conclusion number 2. So we are number 2, so that means yesterday we had number 1. And if you have missed it, please go to our World Heritage YouTube channel to catch up on the recording. And we are also live now on YouTube, and you can also catch up on it if you want to watch it again on YouTube. Today, we are going to have both English and Spanish interpretation. So you can see on the bottom right corner of your screen, there is an interpretation where you can choose English or Spanish channel. So you can choose as you like. And please post your questions during our presentation. Please post your questions on the Q&A section, so we are sure to see it and document it and answer it. And obviously, you can also interact in the chat session if you like. If there's any technical issues, you can't hear anything, please post it on the chat session, and we will address them. So without further ado, I'll just introduce briefly what the session today is about. So the UNESCO World Heritage Convention is an important international treaty that has for almost 50 years played a major role in expanding heritage legislation worldwide and identifying and promoting the protection of a growing list of the world's most unique sites, both cultural and natural, or a mix. But sadly, today, this instrument risks collapsing under its own success. And our World Heritage seeks to, excuse me, the noise. Our World Heritage seeks to counter this destructive trend and renew the original spirit and mission of the World Heritage Convention by engaging citizens, civil society groups, and professional and academic organizations, with the core that together we can shape the future of World Heritage, and acknowledging that to be sustainable, development processes should fully reflect the contribution of heritage conservation. So our World Heritage Sustainability team invited stakeholders to submit case studies from all over the world, illustrating the challenges and solutions for integrating heritage and sustainable development, to explore the key concepts of sustainability in World Heritage: people, planet, prosperity, and peace. So as a result of the call for case studies, we have 124 case studies submitted to us from 50 countries of the 6 world regions: Africa, Asia Pacific, Arab states, Europe, Latin America, and North America. And in this round, in the first round, 52 sites from both inscribed UNESCO World Heritage sites and from the tentative list, national tentative lists, are participating. And these selected case studies have participated in a self-assessment process based on 4 criteria: environmental sustainability, inclusive social development, inclusive economic development, and governance. As our World Heritage Sustainability team, we are very pleased to invite you to participate in this session. As I said, it's the conclusion too for the case studies, and we will have conclusions. We'll hear the conclusions from the regions of Latin America, Africa, and Asia Pacific today. They will be reported by the regional coordinators, which I will introduce in a bit. So we will have the program, the rundown of this session is that we will have the regional coordinator present the conclusion from the regional workshops, which took place in June. And then we will have a guest expert for each region to comment and validate that conclusion. So we'll go through it in the order of Asia Pacific, Africa, and then Latin America. And then we are very pleased to, we're honored to have 2 experts, Gabriel Caballero from ICOMOS and also Mr. Nabek from IUCN, and today to join us to give us their insights as well. So without further ado, let's start with the synthesis outcomes of Asia Pacific, and it will be reported by our regional coordinator, Jana, and I'll just briefly introduce her. Nobody introduced her earlier. So Jana is, of course, one of the members of our sustainability team. She's an architect and heritage management professional with experience of 20 years in both private and public sector in India in the field of urban heritage. And while she was working in Delhi Development Authority and Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, She works in close collaboration with national and international agencies in dealing with heritage management and policy issues with the World Heritage Site in Delhi. She was also a Fulbright scholar, and she has conceptualized the Institute of Heritage Research, which she leads now, and a think tank for policy research on heritage management and working towards building that institution. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Jana.
Thank you, Louis. I'm just going to share the screen. Is it visible? Yeah. So thank you, Louis, for your kind introduction. And as already mentioned, that we have invited stakeholders to submit case studies illustrating the challenges and solutions for integrating heritage and sustainable development to explore key concepts of sustainability in World Heritage. We received a raving number in response, and the selected case studies further participated in a self-assessment process based on 5 criteria: environmental sustainability, inclusive social development, inclusive economic development, peace, security, and governance. So for the Asia and the Pacific, we received about 10 case studies, followed by detailed self-assessment, and from both World Heritage Sites and from tentative list. And these came from stakeholders from the research and academic institutions, site managers, independent researchers, students, the academia, as well as public institutions. We also got the opportunity to interact with the case study stakeholders last month during the Asia and the Pacific workshop on June 15th, which helped us understand more in depth for preparation of the recommendations. So to quickly take the overview of the selected case studies, we have rice terraces of the Philippines Cordilleras. It was presented by Ivan Anthony Henares, Associate Professor at the University of Philippines. And event highlighted inappropriate development decisions, lack of sufficient data and research, inability to mainstream local knowledge to inform the policies. Moving on to the next one, we have Kathmandu Valley, Nepal. It's a World Heritage, it's in the World Heritage list and a cultural site. The case was, however, not presented in the workshop. In the first stage, however, it was highlighted a lack of access of technical expertise, lack of sufficient data and research and legislation. Moving on to Persian Khanate in Iran, it's a World Heritage list and a cultural site. It was presented by Malihal Shamani. She's a doctoral candidate at the Technical University of Munich. And the Khanate is known as the longest Khanate in the world, which excavated during decades by local experts, represent not only a valuable cultural heritage and landscape, but also long experience knowledge. And today there are some urban development interferences which prevent the water flow, besides other problems of the funding shortages, inappropriate development decisions, lack of sufficient data and research, legislation, and interference with urban services. Moving on to Sydney Opera House. Right. So it was presented by Alida Eiserman. She's a heritage officer at the Sydney Opera House. And she highlighted that the management at the Sydney Opera House aimed to be a leader in environmental and social sustainability, and are committed to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The case study highlighted introduction of an industry-leading waste management program and the implementation of projects that optimize the building's water and energy performance and continue to embed sustainability into practices, including those which support conservation of heritage. I'll move on to the next one, the Red Fort Complex. It was presented by Alisha. She was then a trainee at the National Research Laboratory for Conservation of Cultural Property in India. And She highlighted that the 17th century Red Fort is isolated from its city context, the marketplace, the water system, public places, and the people, thereby diminishing its significance. She highlighted the participation of the community has always been neglected in planning of policies by the agencies. And the main issues of the sites are the lack of legislation or the legislation and inappropriate development decisions, access to technical expertise, stakeholder coordination or collaboration, and funding shortage. Moving on to the Ivami Ginza silver mine. I'll highlight a few salient features. This was presented by Mizuko Ugo. She's an associate professor at the Gakushunin Women's College. She highlighted that Ivami Ginzan inhabitants had been at the center of the conservation of the cultural properties and landscape and actively participated together with the administration towards the World Heritage inscription since the beginning, ensuring the awareness of its value among all the inhabitants. This ensured a positive economic cycle and local firms have been created, attracting new inhabitants and securing a sustainable development together with the protection of the site through the cooperation of public and private sectors. She goes on to highlight an education program for children has been carried out to develop a sense of belonging to the World Heritage Site so as to ensure their participation to the conservation of the site also in the future. Green Glow Mobility, electric microbus has been adopted for elderly to visit the site. Moving on to Harlem Bay, this was presented by Hiep. He's a master student at the Technical University of Munich. Harlem Bay, he highlights, is rich in coal, of which extraction and production cause environmental damage, resulting in conflicts amongst people living there. While little effort have been made for sites and environmental preservation, there are conflicts between coal mining versus tourism, between the bay's ecosystem versus aquaculture and harvesting activities. Since there are little or no environmental awareness for the people, and with corrupted government that allow natural resources exploitation to occur, and the future of Harlem Bay is between a polluted sea and an abandoned region. Moving on to the Batanese Protected Landscape Seascape and the 18 sites of the Philippines tentative list. It's in the tentative list and a cultural site. It was presented by Suchipta and of course guided by Gabriel, and we are glad that he's here. So she was a research intern at the ICOMOS Philippines, and ICOMOS Philippines conducted the tentative list research with systematic analysis of the tentative list of the Philippines, the investigation of 19 candidate sites information, and the interview of heritage practitioners in the country indicated strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in the system. This analysis reflected the presence of sustainable development as key importance to develop a better World Heritage tentative list process, broader inclusion of community voices in World Heritage, training heritage practitioners for the heritage inscription process, and developing nature culture pathways, strengthening political will and resources are necessary for compelling nomination dossiers. And she highlighted the challenges in the system, paved the design of a preliminary evaluation strategy in developing the tentative list process in the context of Philippines in a sustainable direction. Moving on to the historic town of Pinghao. It was presented by Shiu Kanda, and it is under the supervision, the site is under the supervision of the World Heritage Center and have a nice urban plan and management plan so that construction in the core zone and buffer zone is well controlled. The site is in the process of implementing resilience strategies towards environmental risk and climate change. And the last one, the ancient water towns in the south of Yangtze River, China. This was a promising case study, but it couldn't be presented, so I'm not going to go into the details of that. Next, okay, so in the stage 2 self-assessment, from the information gathered from the self-assessment, we have tried to color code between lack of information or lack of transparency or lack of action in gray to be addressed urgently in red, and something is under a study or under modification and something has been done but not achieved or well implemented, and green for best practices. And as you can see, for environmental sustainability, we are able to identify 2 best practices. That is one from Australia and Japan, the Sydney Opera House and the silver mines. Moving on to the next one, for inclusive social development, I would like to highlight the Persian Khanate in Iran and the Batanese protected landscape in Philippines, where urgent measures are needed towards social inclusivity in the process of development. Red Fort in India is not far behind. And sustainable, the Sydney Opera House, Harlem Bay, and Pinghao can be identified as best practices. Next, we move on to inclusive, inclusive social development, inclusive economic development. We have some gray areas here identified here, which covers both the case studies from Philippines and resulted from possible lack of information or lack of transparency or lack of action. We have Red Fort in the borderline, but I'm sure if you dig deep into other cases from India, it will possibly be in the red. So moving on to peace and security. Here the questions that we asked were related to conflict prevention and conflict resolution or post-conflict recovery. And this was interesting as this was a great learning process since sites are not in since the sites are not in the zones of conflict. So red doesn't necessarily mean urgent action and gray is reflecting no conflicting zones. Moving on to governance. Here, once again, the Sydney Opera House, Pinghao, and the Ivami Ginza silver mines can be identified as best practices. In addition, it is interesting to see that the 2 case studies from Philippines show contrasting results. Harlem Bay is not far behind as far as good governance is concerned. Moving on to the general average, the Asia and the Pacific region has been unique. Considering the nature of the case studies from countries which are from developed countries such as Japan, Australia, and as well as developing countries such as India. So the next slide, yes, so we move on to the board now. So from information gathered from self-assessment of case studies and learnings from the interactions during the workshop, we went on to the board. And to understand the main regional challenges and strengths. First, we tried to understand this individually in separate categories, as you could see, challenges and strengths from environmental sustainability, then social sustainability, social development, then inclusive economic development, and peace and governance. And from here, we moved on to the regional trends and patterns and to identify challenges, good practices and takeaways, and finally, strategies and methods leading to regional recommendations. And for regional recommendations, we have identified the region recommendations for the Asia Pacific under 3 categories: the leadership and development, bottom-up community and community-based management, and sustainable development goals, livelihood, and social inclusion. So for leadership development, the first recommendation is operative programs for sensitization of politicians to develop political will towards protection of world heritage, tools that encourage effective coordination between multiple stakeholder agencies, government legislations to have provisions to impose a more rigorous financial penalties or imprisonment for actions that may have adverse impact on the heritage value of state and nationally listed heritage sites, and highlight the importance of creating frameworks between site managements in order to share know-how as strategy to overcome creatively the common issues. The next in the category of recommendations, bottom-up community-based management. So the recommendation of 1 is effective programs of awareness for community familiarization of the concepts and terminology of World Heritage Management, active involvement of local community in the process of World Heritage Management, and advanced stakeholder involvement, approach the people in co-realization, co-envisioning, co-shaping,
Sorry, Jenna.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jenna, just a reminder, when you speak, perhaps speak to front, otherwise your sound does, yeah.
It's coming muffled. Okay. So is it better now? I mean, so the third recommendation under this category is advanced stakeholder involvement in co-realization, co-envisioning, co-shaping, co-implementation, monitoring and evaluation, and social learning of a common problem. So from the Sustainable Development Goal category of livelihood, social and inclusion, first recommendation is embed the Sustainable Development Goals into all areas of site management. Trends in the influx of tourists must be strictly measured to give information about the patterns before and after nomination of the site. And also occupation and migration patterns needs to be collected. Stress upon universal accessibility to World Heritage sites to be made more effective, and there's a need for strategic environment, reconciliation and accessibility, physical as well as intellectual. Plans to be prepared in consultation with civil society. Improvement in capacity building and creation of employment opportunities through creative industries. Creation of job opportunities for young people based on heritage preservation strategies, tourist services, shops with local supplies, research centers, etc. Programs for transforming heritage sites from being an attraction not only for profit generation and becoming a place that offers a better quality of life. And lastly, comprehensive issues mapping for transdisciplinary solutions. I end here and thank you very much. And would you introduce Moy or? So thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
Stop sharing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Joanna, for presenting the conclusion from the regional workshops. I think Asia Pacific is certainly a region with very diverse issues, and particularly one of the points that hit me the most is how vulnerable they are even during the pandemic, as we see a lot of the sites were very heavily relying on tourism, and I can see already people that I know, stakeholders on the side, that they are going out of business because of the lack of tourists. So certainly very challenging as well. So without further ado, we're very delighted to have Mo Chiba here as our guest experts for the Asia Pacific region. Let me just introduce her briefly. She's presently the Chief of Culture Unit at UNESCO Jakarta office for Brunei Darussalam, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, and Timor-Leste since 2018. And she joined the UNESCO headquarters in 2000. And she also worked extensively in India since 2006. Moving to Jakarta, she continues her passion for cultural-based development and coordinates projects such as disaster risk reduction of heritage and promotion of youth entrepreneurs around heritage sites and cultural landscape management. And Mo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good evening, everybody. Good evening from Jakarta. Jana and team, thank you so much for the summary of the recommendation from the Asia Pacific group. Well, I fully agree with these points that also correspond to my personal experience in the field in India and then also now in Indonesia. By the way, I hope I'm audible and not talking too fast for the interpreters. Okay, great. So, so just allow me to add my personal perspective as a way of endorsing the recommendations made by the Asia Pacific team. First, we realized that the challenge to the World Heritage is not so much about the core zone, but more and more about the management of the buffer zone and the area beyond, where we have to deal with the different interests and agenda of so many different agencies and groups. So, and this discussion is typically dominated by the ministry in charge of the urban development or the builders. And the voice of the heritage site managers is hardly heard, you know. I see Jana smiling because she was part of the Ministry of Urban Development. So she knows what I'm talking about. So Then World Heritage Center often observed that the quality of heritage impact assessment report submitted by the state parties is very poor quite often. This is because the state party considers heritage impact assessment not as a serious work of assessment, but just a bureaucratic formality to justify proposed development works, because development is more important than heritage conservation. And so this is a kind of good indication of a kind of low status of heritage conservation in the government planning. So we need actually a skillful, strong leader for the World Heritage Site to navigate in this complex political debate and the pro game with other ministries. Well, now, but what is the quality of our leadership then? We have developed many training programs, and now several universities are offering courses on World Heritage Site management. So I feel that there are a good number of professionals at the working level. However, it's very undiplomatic for me to say as a UNESCO officer, but the quality of human resources seems to be rather poor at the level of the leaders. And in many countries, the head of local administration typically act as the head of the World Heritage Site. So these are the bureaucrats who are appointed accidentally to lead the World Heritage Site management, but then they change after 4 years. So they are neither the subject expert nor have a strong political power. And often the fate of the World Heritage Site is in the hand of that kind of people. So this is, I think, the challenge of the leadership that we are facing, and I fully support the recommendation from the group that there needs to be a proper training to grow this adequate human resources at the leadership level. Now, one category of leadership we need to nurture is probably the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because our World Heritage Committee is typically governed by the diplomats and the ambassadors, isn't it? So they argue about World Heritage nominations and management from a totally different perspective, a more of a diplomatic perspective than a heritage conservation perspective. So I guess this is where we need to do some capacity building training. Now, community bottom-up approach was one of the essential recommendations. As you know, World Heritage Committee back in 2007 adopted 5 strategic objectives of the convention, which we call 5 Cs, which are conservation, credibility, capacity building, and then communication and communities. Interestingly, until 2000, I recall many papers were still discussing about local communities as a kind of pest or nuisance to conservation. Now, the time has fortunately changed, and nobody today questions the fact that the community should be the primary stakeholders and beneficiary of the World Heritage Site management. Nonetheless, it's interesting, many of our colleagues in the working group mentioned at this point the community bottom-up approach as part of the recommendations, because probably implementing a proper community consultation is still very difficult in reality. Actually, the community consultation is an art and expertise of its own, which really requires adequate methodologies and experienced persons. And these are not always part of the standard training of the heritage conservation. And so what we realized that so-called community consultations that we're practicing at the World Heritage Sites is quite top-down. We simply give lectures on the heritage and we call it community participation, while we're actually just giving lessons and preaching people. So I fully kind of support those colleagues who raised this point about importance of having a proper community consultation mechanism, because we are still not good at that. Now, finally, the SDGs, our big jargon SDGs. Well, we involve communities because we want them to be the primary beneficiaries of the World Heritage Site status of the area, right? And then UNESCO is part of the UN family. So whatever we do has to contribute to the SDG. We cannot say that heritage conservation for the sake of heritage conservation is no more a valid argument, you know. So the one obvious linkage between the World Heritage Site and SDG is the job creation through World Heritage tourism that many of our colleagues pointed out. But we realized that many government authorities tend to make this rosy speech that World Heritage status and tourism automatically benefit local livelihood. But we also know that it's not always the case, because we have witnessed that tourism development tends to focus on infrastructure development in many countries and not sufficiently in the capacity building of the local communities. The government also tend to favor big investors rather than the local SMEs, and that are slowly sidelining the local people. So we have seen this kind of situation in so many World Heritage sites like Ram Prabang, Galle, Georgetown, and whatnot. So I'm kind of fully understand why our experts in the group were so much concerned about local livelihood, because this is not something which has been fulfilled. We need to, in fact, monitor how the World Heritage sites benefit locally. The big government usually only collect the macro data on the general turnover of the World Heritage tourism, but this data does not tell who benefited exactly in that country. Most likely, these are not the local people, but some big businesses. So one way to monitor the local impact is actually to collect data on the local occupational patterns and migration patterns. Unfortunately, this kind of analysis, however, remains rare. So I'm very happy to see that in the recommendations they made about this point on the need to collect the local data about occupations and migrations. Another thing we need to seriously think about is a balance between tourism and local need. That was also highlighted in the recommendation. In Asia, tourism is considered the main solution, like a godlike solution to economic development. And many governments have a tendency to over-invest in tourism facilities. Rather than investing in local needs, such as proper access road or sewage for the locals, sewage system for the locals. Well, in case of Indonesia, interestingly, the government thinks that the big Sentosa tourism complex in Singapore is the model, is a model for the development. So now there's a plan for that Sentosa style big complex everywhere in Indonesia, which is kind of scary, because this might be a fancy place for foreigners like us to chill out, but I don't see any benefit at all for the local people living around there. So it's quite frustrating that that we actually see many situations where the quality of the life of the local people remain quite low in those famous heritage destinations, and this has to change. We have to make a serious link between the World Heritage Site management and the SDGs, especially the local well-being. But actually, it is not the World Heritage Site managers to be blamed most of the time, because this local development, SMEs, etc., is not part of the mandate of most of the heritage site managers. It is actually the problem of the leadership, the failure of the government to have that vision to link this World Heritage Site status with much bigger sustainable development goals of the people. So actually, this recommendation goes back to these questions of how to build a proper leaders to guide the World Heritage Site management. My site management in Asia Pacific. So let me stop here. So I'm sorry I spoke maybe too long, but thank you very much. I fully support the frustrations and also the recommendation coming from the Asia Pacific group. And we look forward to the opportunities for further discussion on then how to change this dynamic.
Thank you very much, Mo, for your comments and insights. Yeah, we can definitely see how complex these issues are. And I'm sure this will be echoed in the next two regions report as well in discussion, and we can further discuss that later on. So a little bit change of a schedule. We'll have perhaps the Latin America region going on first. So The synthesis outcomes of Latin America will be presented by the regional coordinator, Ruben Pesky. And let me introduce him very briefly. He is one of the co-conveners of this Sustainability Debate Month. And he's a recognized initiator in Latin America of thought and action with environmental criteria. He founded the SIPA Foundation in La Plata in 1974, and he has worked in La Plata for since the 1980s. And he is the president of LACAM, the Latin America Forum of Environmental Sciences. And he is also the chair of, director of the UNESCO chair and FLACAM chair for sustainable development as well. And he has very extensive research and working experience in the World Heritage sites in Latin America. Without further ado, Ruben, the floor is yours.
Muy buenos días. ¿Me escuchan bien? Espero que sí. Sí, me escuchan bien. Bueno, muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes, muy buenas noches, según los diferentes horarios del mundo. Esto es emocionante, fascinante, y es para mí un honor, como presidente del Foro Latinoamericano de Ciencias Ambientales, haber contribuido como convener a este gran proceso de nuestro patrimonio mundial y en especial en este encuentro sobre América Latina. Bien, este grupo del Team Sustentable en América Latina ha logrado mirar, ver, conocer espléndidos casos en toda nuestra región. El patrimonio del paisaje cafetero en Colombia, que está en la lista del patrimonio mundial y que ha sido presentado por excelentes investigadores académicos como Juan Carlos Olivares Castro, Miguel Incapié, Wilmer Alexis Leguizamón Rincón, María Eugenia Beltrán Franco. Y debo decir con mucho placer que he conocido profundamente este corredor cultural de cafetero y que los que presentan el caso, profesores ya importantes con trayectoria, varios han sido alumnos nuestros en nuestra maestría en desarrollo sustentable. Es un caso muy interesante y uno de los primeros en plantearse como corredor cultural, que es una categoría que a mí personalmente me parece muy interesante como urbanista, planificador, ambientalista. Es un caso típico donde se sale del objeto monumental para hablar del sitio y el sitio ya como una verdadera región de paisaje. El segundo caso está en la misma línea, paisaje cultural carioca, y es un caso fascinante, aún en evolución, presentado por Alda Acevedo Ferreira. Porque, claro, Río de Janeiro es una de las más grandes ciudades del mundo y al mismo tiempo conserva un patrimonio paisajístico colosal, que todos reconocemos que está en las tarjetas postales del mundo. Y Alda Acevedo Ferreira nos ha mostrado con mucha claridad lo que ya se ha logrado y todo lo que falta hacer para esta interpretación del paisaje. Fíjense que los dos primeros casos orientan claramente a paisaje cultural. Y esto nos va marcando una tendencia. Lo mismo sucede con la ciudad de Potosí, en Bolivia, presentado por Ana Patricia Huancapaco. Es una ciudad fascinante allá en las alturas de los Andes bolivianos, donde la conservación y el desarrollo han tenido choques durante mucho tiempo. Imagínense que allí está el cerro de Potosí, el cerro de La Plata famoso, de ahí sale el nombre de mi ciudad de La Plata, que se encontraba o que buscaban los españoles subiendo hasta los altos Andes desde el Río de la Plata. Un caso que también está fuertemente horadando estas categorías donde paisaje natural, paisaje social y paisaje cultural se empiezan a interactuar. Es el caso del Pantanal paraguayo, que está en la lista tentativa, aún no es patrimonio mundial, pero resultaba muy interesante tenerlo aquí y presentado muy bien por Marcelo Bogado. La península Valdés, en Argentina, en la Patagonia Argentina, que está en la lista del Patrimonio Mundial hace mucho tiempo ya, presentado por Juan Emilio Sala y Piedad María Lozano. Es un caso extremadamente interesante por su diversidad biológica marina en particular. Muy poco habitado, es todo ya preservado desde su plan inicial hace casi 40 años, y se ha mantenido. Hay algunos problemas que vamos a señalar más adelante que dan la característica especial de este espléndido sitio natural. Luego tenemos el barrio histórico de la ciudad portuaria de Valparaíso, en Chile, que es un patrimonio mundial y está presentado por Teresita Núñez, una muy conocida investigadora de la Universidad de Buenos Aires. Bueno, acá se hace una reflexión interesante también a cuánto se podía preservar, cuánto se está preservando, cuánto se está viendo dañado por el crecimiento de la urbanización y en particular del cambio de patrones en los criterios urbanos. Algo parecido pasa en otro sitio de Argentina, la quebrada de Humahuaca, que también es un corredor cultural, un paisaje cultural interesantísimo en los altos Andes del norte de Argentina, pero que tiene que revisar muchas de sus actuaciones, según señalan sus propios autores, los propios autores del proyecto presentado. Josefina María del Valle Ocampo, Fabiola, Vanessa, Sibila, Orellana. Es un caso muy interesante que está buscando entender mejor toda esta gran categoría del paisaje cultural y de los corredores culturales que tienen pocos años de existencia en la lista mundial. Luego tenemos el caso muy famoso de Cartagena, Cartagena de Indias en Colombia, donde se ha declarado Patrimonio Mundial el puerto, las fortalezas y el grupo de monumentos. Hay una selección, una suerte de archipiélago, podríamos llamarlo, de sitios, de monumentos puntuales en el marco de una ciudad histórica de las más conservadas físicamente de América Latina y de una ciudad que luego ha crecido como centro turístico de carácter internacional. Lo presentan también varios exalumnos nuestros de la maestría en desarrollo sustentable, brillantes ellos, desde la muy joven Dayana Rocha, pasando por Carlos Endal, Hernando Londoño Sanz, Johan Gutiérrez Jaraba y Ricardo Alberto Zabaleta Puello, con mucha experiencia en patrimonio. Finalmente tenemos el centro histórico, no, faltan algunos más todavía, el centro histórico de la ciudad de Arequipa, un caso descollante porque fue declarado por la Unesco como centro histórico, pero asociado a la campiña productiva agrícola intensiva que rodea a la ciudad histórica. Esto ha sido presentado por Mauricio Huaco, William Palomino y Carlos Ceballos, todos ellos de la Universidad Mayor San Agustín, y William es uno de los gestores centrales de todo este proceso. Y es un caso interesante porque hay cambios que amenazan el centro histórico, cierta gentrificación, cierto fachadismo, se conserva la fachada y falta trabajo adentro. La campiña tiene que crecer también en su calidad de sitio del patrimonio, pero acá hay un detalle muy importante. Esta gente, estos brillantes investigadores, con gran apoyo de William como gestor público, han desarrollado una mirada totalmente nueva, a mi juicio, muy interesante, la del museo vivo. La ciudad se convierte toda ella en museo, en las calles, en los sitios más diversos, donde se desarrolla el patrimonio intangible en buena medida, poesía, música, gastronomía, y junto con ello maquetas de los edificios principales. Todo esto genera un trabajo participativo, a mi juicio, muy interesante. Y nos vamos a los últimos, Cuetzalán y sus alrededores históricos, culturales y naturales, presentado por Melissa Schumacher, que también considero que debe destacarse en el sentido de que lo social, la forma en que se ha involucrado la ciudadanía, no solo en los monumentos, sino en todo el sitio, es una evolución, a mi juicio, muy interesante en la manera en que se está trabajando los sitios de patrimonio mundial. El Parque Nacional de Huascarán, en los Altos Andes de Perú, presentado por Li Bianqian, a mí me llamó mucho la atención porque en realidad es una mirada desde los riesgos. Se producen unas torrentes de agua muy intensos y muy peligrosos cuando hay deshielos rápidos. Y esto hizo que la intervención patrimonial fuera a generar un sistema de alerta temprano. Pura tecnología para generar alertas tempranos que disminuyan el riesgo de las poblaciones. El patrimonio genera riesgos en las poblaciones y la manera de salvar a esas poblaciones es interviniendo en el patrimonio no de manera material, física, agresiva, sino de manera informática para tener datos a tiempo. Muy interesante. Y ahora sí, finalmente, el caso del Centro Histórico de Santa Ana de los Ríos de Cuenca, presentado por Bárbara Molina, una bonita ciudad de origen hispánico, como casi todas las que vemos en muchas partes de América Latina. Los españoles fundaron 500 ciudades entre los siglos XVI, XVII hasta el XVIII, y esta es una de ellas, que ha tenido planes de manejo interesantes, que hay una concientización de la población interesante y que por ello se ha mantenido como paisaje urbano histórico. Paisaje urbano histórico, acá utiliza esta recomendación de 2011, muy interesante, esta recomendación como metodología de trabajo. Entonces, resumiendo, tenemos 13 casos de estudio. En 9 países, bien diversificada ha sido la búsqueda y la selección, en Argentina, Bolivia, Brasil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, México, Paraguay y Perú, casi toda Latinoamérica. Con 5 sitios culturales, 3 sitios naturales y 5 sitios mixtos. Y hay una tendencia al mixto. Muchos responden, cuando hemos hecho estos trabajos participativos, que todos desean sentirse como paisajes mixtos o patrimonios mixtos, lo cual me parece muy interesante. De ellos, fíjense, 10 declaran su voluntad de ser entendidos como paisajes culturales, 1 como paisaje en riesgo y 2 como áreas de conflicto. Y han participado 7 instituciones académicas, 5 investigadores independientes y una ONG. También hay una creciente desarrollo de intervenciones variadas y equipos mixtos. Bueno, ¿cuáles son los criterios utilizados para hacer esta evaluación? Como han visto en los casos anteriores también, ¿no? Sustentabilidad ambiental, sustentabilidad e inclusión social, sustentabilidad e inclusión económica, paz, seguridad y gobernanza. Y hemos utilizado también estos tableros de colores para entender qué es lo que pasa. Bueno, fíjense que si la vista no nos engaña, tenemos una dominancia de amarillos, que es un caso, digamos, de mediano escaso desarrollo, está entre mediano y escaso desarrollo de ese patrón sobre todos nuestros valores, ¿no es cierto? Todos los valores que hemos venido definiendo en el grupo de sustentabilidad. No quiero repetirme porque esta evaluación se hace también en los otros regiones del mundo, por lo tanto ustedes ya conocen. Y fíjense, es muy interesante el predominio de verdes y amarillos oscuros en la sustentabilidad social. Es una, yo creo, general preocupación de toda América Latina que debe entenderse a nivel mundial. Muy importante en ese sentido, entonces, la búsqueda de la inclusividad social. Sin embargo, si nos vamos, por ejemplo, a la económica, ya bajamos a un dominio, y fíjense la columna de promedios, la columna de la derecha es la columna de promedios. Fíjense que está prácticamente en amarillo claro. Es decir, es insuficiente el desarrollo económico inclusivo que se fomenta en estos sitios de patrimonio, con excepciones, con excepciones, que las que aparecen en colores más oscuros, el poblado de San Pedro de Atacama y otros. Y sí, es muy claro que en paz y seguridad tenemos muchísimos rojos en la columna. Acá hay problemas en varios países en particular, También puede darse que no se haya entendido muy bien este punto de nuestra encuesta. Y el último, la gobernanza, también estamos ya en un amarillo, pero un amarillo tendiendo a amarillo oscuro y algunos verdes. Hay intentos, si bien la preocupación, como vamos a ver ahora, de la gobernanza es muy fuerte. Bueno, el promedio general muestra esos verdes claros, amarillos oscuros. En la región no presentaría un muy mal panorama, pero estamos en un promedio del orden de 3 puntos, 3 y algo, que entre 1 y 5 deja bastante que desear. Hay preocupación en la presentación que han hecho los propios investigadores y gestores de los casos. Hay preocupación en América Latina. Y la vamos a ver ahora. Esas conclusiones van a reflejar estas preocupaciones. En sustentabilidad ambiental tenemos desafíos, por no llamarlos debilidades. Las preferimos ver como que son aspectos con alguna criticidad, pero que necesita desafiarse a superarlo. Tenemos que profundizar la formulación e instalación de políticas de sustentabilidad y su aplicación concreta. Muchas veces hay políticas escritas y no hay aplicación. Reconocer la importancia de la planificación urbano-territorial integral y su real implementación y seguimiento permanente. Es muy alto el mal puntaje que saque esto, porque en general o no se hacen las planificaciones urbanas o no se aplican, como hemos visto en la sustentabilidad también, porque el crecimiento urbano en América Latina es el más alto del mundo, con mayores tasas de crecimiento veloz, por migraciones rurales, por tantos fenómenos sociales y económicos internacionales, yo diría, de derechos humanos y demás, que muchas veces crecen alrededor de sitios magníficos, algunas barriadas llenas de carencias, con dificultades sociales que no favorecen al patrimonio ni a la calidad de vida de esa gente. Crear normas e instrumentos para frenar el desborde urbano es una consecuencia clara del anterior y sus consecuentes impactos negativos sobre el patrimonio natural y cultural tangible e intangible. Frenar la tendencia a la gentrificación en los centros históricos, fenómeno mundial, pero en América Latina muy típico por el contraste entre los más ricos y los más pobres, que hacen que algunos ricos terminen desplazando a los más pobres de sus viejos patrimonios en los sitios magníficos del continente y quedándose entonces con la belleza. Evitar la masificación del turismo y sus riesgos sobre el patrimonio, que ya sucede en muchos de estos sitios. Es uno de los casos de la propia Cartagena que hemos mencionado antes. ¿Y cuáles son las oportunidades? La creciente incorporación de la visión contextual y de paisaje. Hay un crecimiento notable del conocimiento y la valorización de la visión contextual, no solo del paisaje local, sino del paisaje general. Hay una visión holística, hay una visión sistémica bien desarrollada. Bien, vamos a lo inclusivo, al desarrollo social inclusivo. ¿Cuáles son los desafíos? Crear herramientas y canales para garantizar la transparencia de datos y minimizar la falta de información y o de divulgación de la misma en muchos casos. Crear herramientas, crear canales de comunicación y transferencia de datos. Profundizar las estrategias y herramientas tendientes a alcanzar un verdadero desarrollo endógeno. Incorporación de las comunidades locales, generación de empleos, empoderamiento, entre otros. El patrimonio como un objeto de desarrollo y no solo de conservación para las sociedades locales. Garantizar la incorporación de las comunidades indígenas en la planificación, manejo y gestión del sitio. La cuestión indígena, la cuestión de las comunidades de origen ancestral es muy importante en América Latina y aquí se lo tiene como una necesidad, un desafío. ¿Y cuáles son las oportunidades? Se viabiliza la apropiación de la participación como metodología y estrategia de actuación creciente. En casi todos los casos se pondera la participación y se intenta practicarla, en algunos casos de manera muy destacada y con metodologías innovadoras, como mencioné para mi gusto en el caso de Arequipa. y creciente conciencia de género y de la importancia de la multiculturalidad, que es un fenómeno típico de los países latinoamericanos. El desarrollo económico inclusivo sorprende más bien en un sentido contrario, ¿no? Hay que profundizar las estrategias y herramientas tendientes a alcanzar un verdadero desarrollo endógeno, fortalecimiento de la cadena de valor, economía circular, distribución de la tierra, multiculturalidad, entre otros, porque hay muchas injusticias en este continente. Y en cambio, la existencia ya de experiencias de buenas prácticas en turismo sustentable asociadas a esta mirada de World Heritage Sustainability que dan la esperanza de un crecimiento en esta manera de trabajar. Para paz y gobernabilidad, o gobernanza, perdón, para paz y gobernanza tenemos que superar la falta de articulación intersectorial e interjurisdiccional. Se producen fenómenos aislados, son de medio ambiente, o son de historia, o son de economía, pero la articulación de todos esos enfoques no se cumple con alta calidad y recurrencia. Hay que instalar, en tanto, la sustentabilidad del patrimonio como política pública y su transversalidad a todas las áreas, que no ocurre casi en ningún caso. Propiciar una mayor articulación, por lo tanto, entre los sectores privado, público, académico y social, civil, que es lo que justamente llamamos gobernanza. Incorporar la gestión del riesgo en todas sus dimensiones como parte de la planificación y gestión del sitio y su entorno, para lo cual destaqué el caso de Huascarán y los mecanismos de prevención de inundaciones. Incorporar la planificación territorial como condición y criterio insoslayable en el plan de manejo y gestión del sitio y su entorno. En los planes de manejo muchas veces se ha producido manejo de la cosa concreta, de aquel monumento, de aquel sitio bien restringido, sin tener planificación del crecimiento urbano. Ya lo hemos dicho y volvemos al tipo. Tendencia hacia una gestión integral, entonces, y a la gobernanza público-privada del sitio. Y, en cambio, en estas oportunidades que ya se disponen, fortalezas, trabajo en red y nuevos instrumentos. Se observan instrumentos como laboratorios u observatorios, llevando la conservación de estos sitios a un nivel de seguimiento científico, con lo cual se produce una transferencia entre académicos, universidades y gestión del sitio, que tiene que aprovecharse mucho más por el alto nivel en general de los profesionales y científicos en América Latina. Y reconocimiento de las importancias de las alianzas para alcanzar los objetivos, donde tenemos indicaciones muy claras como los famosos ODS, Objetivos del Desarrollo Sostenible. Entonces, ONGs, sector público, privado, academia, sociedad civil organizada, en fin, hay valores altos en América Latina para propiciar este camino. Entonces, empezando a dar una síntesis más apretada, superar la visión sectorial, escisión natural, cultural. Es interesante la fotografía aquí elegida, porque realmente muestra que el paisaje puede ir de lo más natural en la sierra hasta esa llanura perfectamente organizada en su diseño de la producción agraria, y el pequeño poblado histórico en el medio. Esto es una conjunción típica del paisaje latinoamericano y merece tener ejemplo de alto nivel internacional. Y propender hacia la visión contextual e integral en avance hacia la noción de paisaje patrimonial. Muchísimas gracias, espero haber sido claro. Y esta tendencia del objeto al sitio, del sitio al entorno, del entorno al paisaje integral, me parece muy propicia para el patrimonio en el futuro. Nos parece en América Latina, nos parece, no a mí, sino en América Latina, muy propicia para América Latina, donde se encuentran situaciones de diversidad natural magníficas, como de las mejores del mundo, con situaciones de herencia cultural europea que han persistido como espléndidos monumentos y algunos paisajes, como el de Arequipa, por ejemplo, y el entronque, el ensamble de eso con la increíble cultura ancestral indígena, con toda su variedad y su calidad, que nos trae el pasado al presente y nos proyecta al futuro. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ruben, for the wonderful presentation. And I'm sure that our expert will have a lot to say, so I won't take the time. So I'll just introduce our next guest expert, Alfredo Conti. He's an architect and also a professor at the National University of La Plata. And he has extensive working and research experience in Latin America. And between 2010 and 2017, he's also the vice president of ICOMOS, and he coordinated tasks related to the implementation of the World Heritage Convention. And since 2000, he's an ICOMOS expert in the evaluation and monitoring of the World Heritage Sites in Latin America and the Caribbean. He's also a UNESCO consultant in projects related to cultural heritage and have participated in activities with the Getty Conservation Institute, the World Monument Fund, and the Organization of World Heritage Cities. I would just very gently and boldly remind you to perhaps keep the comment within 5 minutes so we can have some more time for the discussion later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liu, for your kind presentation. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the conveners of this important discussion, Ege and Ruben, for having considered my participation in these sessions. I could be very short, really, because it's quite difficult to add something after such a comprehensive presentation by Ruben. Of course, I agree and I endorse the conclusions and recommendations, but I try to summarize what I could hear and what I could read after the regional workshop. First of all, it's very important for Latin America that there were 13 case studies. Sometimes in a region, it's not easy that people respond to our invitation. So 13 cases coming from 9 countries and the variety of cases between cultural landscapes, historic centers, or natural sites. This is really a very big success for Latin America, and I would like to highlight that. I was also impressed after hearing the presentation from Asia Pacific that beyond the geographical and cultural differences between the two regions, there are really common features and I would say common problems. And I would even say that they are problems that appear everywhere in the world. Regarding the presentations from Latin America, I would like to highlight some common issues that I have found. First of all, the lack or partial implementation of management plans. And of course, there is a need to update the management plans or instruments, especially to integrate, to mainstream the sustainable development approach. There is an insufficient participation of local communities and indigenous groups in the management processes, and especially in the decision-making processes. The issue of tourism, of unsustainable tourism appears everywhere in the world, and it's quite a difficult issue for some heritage places in Latin America. And we have also found quite a few needs or necessities. One of them is to introduce a wider vision when planning or elaborating the management plans and instruments. And I mean a wider vision related to go beyond the boundaries of the inscribed zones or even the buffer zones, as Ruben has highlighted. We need a regional and a landscape vision, even in the cases of, if you like, small World Heritage sites. Of course, we need to incorporate intangible attributes into the management plans and processes, even though the sites inscribed on the list are tangible and unmovable. But this has been highlighted by several presentations in the Latin American regions, that the intangible aspects, I mean, local traditions, local practices, are not taken into account when planning the management of the sites. And also, there is a need to incorporate risk preparedness, which is not fully incorporated in many of the management plans. I would like to recall that the second periodic reporting on the implementation of the convention in Latin America and the Caribbean was presented to the committee in 2013. And at that time, for most of the sites, it was acknowledged that management systems were only partially implemented. The third cycle will start next September, so we will have in 2 years' time, perhaps a new diagnosis. But actually, management is one of the weakest, if you like, aspect of the whole implementation of the convention in this region. So, I would like to mention another problem for Latin America and the Caribbean. Over the last year, there is a wide array of approaches, of new approaches, of documents related to sustainable development, climate change, risk preparedness, the considerations of not only of stakeholders, but also of right holders. But as you are aware, the working languages of the committee are English and French. And unfortunately, some of the new documents are not translated into other languages in this region, particularly into Spanish. And this is a limit because, unfortunately, there are some site administrators, not to say local communities, that cannot read those languages. So much of the available information is not reachable by many people in the region. And this is, I think, a problem that we have to find the ways or how to cope with it, because actually we need to disseminate these new approaches. So trying to summarize and finish my presentation, I would say that perhaps the main challenge for the region is the elaboration on, in many cases, updating of the management plans or the management systems, especially introducing, mainstreaming the sustainable development approach. I would say that we need to take into account these documents adopted over the last 10 years, the historical landscape recommendation. There are documents, as I said, on climate change, risk preparedness, the links between nature and culture, the consideration of not only stakeholders, but also right holders, and especially on tourism, there are a lot of new tools. I would like to recall that there is a special program within the World Heritage Center regarding sustainable tourism at World Heritage Sites. And there is a toolkit which is very practical, but my feeling is that it hasn't been sufficiently used so far. And there is another aspect that I would like to highlight. I think that it's absolutely important to introduce the heritage impact assessment into the management systems. So I think we have many challenges, and on the other hand, we have really instruments, we have papers, we have recommendations, we have guidances. So perhaps the challenge for our regions is how to bridge the gap between, let's say, the theory contained in all those documents and the practice, and especially how to incorporate local communities and indigenous people, how to guarantee gender balance, which is also a problem in our region in the management system. So there is a lot of work to do, but I'm very happy that this kind of meetings, exercises, and discussions will help in the work to do in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alfredo, for your comments. And certainly, I think the need to have an approach that can transcend the tangible, intangible, and natural nature divide is certainly needed, not just in Latin America and certainly also in Asia Pacific, and I'm sure in Africa as well, as our presentation will talk about in a little bit. So yeah, so I won't take up more time, and I will introduce our presenter for the region of Africa, and this will be presented by our region coordinator Pamela Duran-Diaz and also Juliana Strogan. And very briefly, Pamela is an architect and she has a PhD in urbanism and a postdoc in sustainable management of cultural landscapes. She is a scientific researcher at the Technical University of Munich, and she has very extensive research and working experience all across the world, and very particularly, very recently in Africa as well. So I'll just leave the floor to her. And Juliana, sorry, let me just also introduce you very briefly. Juliana Strogan is a conservator and heritage manager, and she has a master in World Heritage and Cultural Projects for Development from the University of Torino. And she's a site manager, and she's also a member of ICOMOS Norway Scientific Committee and the head of the National Committee for Industrial Heritage. And she will be also assisting with Pamela to give us this regional conclusion. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good day, everybody, and welcome to our second case studies conclusion session. Thank you, Louis, for the introduction. And thanks also to our international experts and to our attendees for joining us today. Yes, well, I facilitated the African Regional Workshop back in June with the help and support of my OWH sustainability teammates, Juliana Strogan and Shadrach Chirikuri. And we are very lucky to have here Dr. Tokie Lautan-Brown as the regional expert. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. So we coordinated the Africa Case Studies Regional Workshop back in June, where we analyzed and discussed 10 different sites in Africa. The 10 different sites are the following. Ruwenzori Mountains National Park in Uganda is a listed natural site, and that was submitted by an NGO represented by Frederick C. Bambi. We had the Tombs of Bukanda Kings at Kasubi in Uganda. It's a listed cultural site submitted by an academic institution represented by Priscilla Tusime. Kakamega Tropical Forest in Kenya, a cultural site in the tentative list, submitted by an academic institution represented by Lucy Mandela. The Rock-hewn churches in Lalibela in Ethiopia is a listed cultural site submitted by a consultant, Feker Selassie Sifir Mexia. We had the cultural landscape of Lake Chad, which goes across Cameroon, Nigeria, and Chad. It's a mixed site in the tentative list, submitted by a public institution represented by Alice Biada. Also, Lamu Old Town in Kenya, a listed cultural site submitted by site manager Muhammad Ali Muenji. We also had Aprabasi Ghat, it's a World Heritage Site in Mauritius, submitted by a public institution represented by Biyaya Bedarur Potea. Also, Matobo Hills in Zimbabwe, a listed cultural site. It was submitted by an academic institution represented by Tendai Fortune Muringa. Mapumbwe Cultural Landscape in South Africa, a listed cultural site. That was submitted by a public institution represented by Ndukuyakwe Ndolovu. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And last but not least, we have the sacred Mijikenda Kaya forests in Kenya. It's a listed cultural site represented or submitted by an academic institution represented by Herman Kiriyama. It's a good mix of cultural, natural mixed sites with typological, geographical variety seen through the perspective of different types of stakeholders, as you could have seen. When we analyzed the data and discussed it during the workshop, this data revealed that in terms of environmental sustainability, in Kenya, traditional management systems have rules and regulations that, for instance, forbid starting fires or cutting trees or harvesting sands. Also, urban growth pressure has hindered these practices, where there are awareness campaigns in schools and within the community to protect the natural and intangible heritage. Mauritius stands out for its environmental practices. In terms of tourism management, the visitor management strategy of Mauritius, despite being traced with consultation with local stakeholders, is being challenged at the moment by the increased number of visitors, for which the infrastructures are frankly not prepared. In the sacred Mijikenda Kaya forest, they handle it by capping the weekly number of visitors to ensure that the forest is not stressed. So maybe this is a practice from which we can learn. Lake Chad in Cameroon, Lamu Old Town in Kenya, Kasubi Tombs in Kampala, and Matobo Hills in Zimbabwe state that more work should be done in terms of efficiently managing tourism, and that they are working on it. In general, there are existing initiatives, but they require an investment to support the potential new tourism on heritage sites. I would like to highlight Kakamega Tropical Forest Innovative Approach through research, patent, and digital documentation. They even have a biodiversity information center. And Matobo Hills, despite being located at about 35 kilometers from the urban community of Bulawayo, sometimes gets reports of people that poach river sand and gravel from the protected area for the infrastructure development in urban areas. For the social inclusion axis, well, we happily had a collection of good practices in this regard. Kakamega in Kenya, Mombasa also in Kenya, Mauritius, and Ruwenzori in Uganda clearly stand out in terms of community education programs that support local cultural festivals. Lamu Old Town especially encourages the youth and women, and the site management runs a vocational training center for adolescent girls. And the site management even operates the only public library within Lamu Town. On the other hand, the Council of Elders of the Sacred Mijikenda Kaya Forest stand out as a parliament and judiciary system for the community. And they are also engaged in the protection of heritage. Women are members of the management committee of the site. This goes in line with the respect of traditional leadership in communities of Matobo Hills, who are custodians of sacred heritage sites. This system is, however, not always inclusive in terms of age or socioeconomical status, for example. In Ruwenzori Mountains, the site is surrounded by indigenous minority groups who have exceptional control access to the resources of the natural park. And in Mapungubwe, a part of the indigenous population is employed within the park with permanent or contractual basis. Now, in the economic inclusion axis, it is hard to find a pattern here because the answers vary a lot. But I have to say that ecotourism is a consistent strategy. In this sense, indigenous development is mainly expressed through the art of making the crafts units with a variety of materials. There is therefore a need to diversify it in any case. The sacred Mijikenda Kaya forests have achieved this diversification by strengthening income-generating projects within the community, such as beekeeping, for example, or seedling germination. I would nevertheless like to highlight the social complaint from Lamu Old Town in Kenya, stating that the value chain of the site is monopolized by foreign countries. Many African sites still rely on donations to boost tourism and to manage the sites. In the peace and security axis, there is a consistent void of information, hopefully led by the fortunate lack of conflict. Nevertheless, I believe that the site should be involved in preventing conflict and also have a plan to protect heritage in case of conflict. I would like to invite you to see the recorded presentation of the 9th of July, where we dug deeply into the concept of conflict. In any case, Lamu Old Town and Zimbabwe claim that the site has no strategy nor capacity, and the staff is not trained in case of conflict. And this is something to keep in mind, not only for the African World Heritage, but World Heritage in general. But I have to say that Ruwenzori does they do have a strategy, and Kenya and Uganda are not that far. They are working on that, and this means that something is being done to overcome this void of information. In the governance access, it is important to notice that Kampala states that they do not guarantee nor enforce the rule of law. This is food for thought. Many of the sites experience bureaucracy, which slows down the implementation of activities, of measures, of monitoring and evaluation plan, but corruption is even more concerning. But to be honest, I thought this would be more of a serious issue, but was positively surprised to find a collection of good practices in Mombasa and Mauritius in South Africa and Ruwenzori. Most of the sites have a transparent management, which is a wonderful success. Also, I have to say that Kampala and Zimbabwe are partially transparent, and Cameroon has no evidence of this transparency. Local community representation in the site management and decision-making processes is an asset in some sites. But in many sites, there is still a need to engage local stakeholders in site management. Community participation is limited, and sometimes the collaboration is not consistent because some roles and rules are overlapping or conflicting. Now, the takeaways from our African regional workshop are the following. In terms of environmental sustainability, there are unarticulated policies on biodiversity. There is a lot of pressure for urban development. There is an anthropogenic disturbance of ecosystems. So there are man-made problems that are disturbing our ecosystems, such as pollution, resource exploitation. There is something more external, but also man-made, like climate change, and this is not being addressed in the site management. And there is a lack of waste management strategies. But there are certain strengths. When a site gets the World Heritage status, they start protecting the intangible values, and they start protecting their biodiversity. They also have a lot of strategies regarding ecotourism, and there is a trend to link management plan with alternatives to environmental issues. In terms of inclusive social development, there is a lot of pressure by population growth that is not under control. There is a migration crisis driven by conflict and by a rural exodus as well. And this also derives in unemployment. But there are certain strategies for intergenerational equity. This is something that has it has a strong root in African cultures. In many African cultures, they don't see time as an incisive linear arrow, but something cyclic. The time of the older generation, the time of the dead, the time of the living, and the time of those still unborn. And this, this gives a lot of responsibility in terms of intergenerational equity. In terms of inclusive economic development, there is an unsustainable relationship with tourism as a mono-economic culture for development. The marketing capacity is not yet developed. There is a lot of unregulated business development as well. There's, as mentioned before, a lot of unemployment. And whenever there is something that is not going right, the first sector that suffers it is culture. But there are incentives like ecotourism, and there's a lot of international private cooperation and support. And there are some income-generating conservation-linked projects, as mentioned before. In terms of peace and governance, there is an unbalanced rule of law, bureaucracy and unarticulated processes, corruption and political interests, migration, poverty, unemployment. The conflict resolution methods don't take into account, or not always take into account, traditional conflict resolution methods or systems. And there is a lack of conservation policies, a lack of gender policies, a lack of policies that include people with disabilities. There are no real implementation of guidelines, human resources management plan. In some cases, there was not even a site manager. But there are some strengths, of course. There is this integrated nature culture management approach, which is something unique to Africa, and it's a certain asset. There are management systems that also consider traditional social and environmental processes, although there is usually a clash between tradition and modernity in Africa. And there is a need, but also a trend to undergo administrative restructurations. So wrapping up, in Africa, development and implementation processes are slow because there is a lot of urban development pressure. There's pollution, illegal hunting, poaching of wildlife. I'm sorry, I will take some water. Logging, mining, population pressure, and climate change, among other impacts on environmental sustainability of our African world heritage. At the same time, poverty, poor access or no access to education, food, water, shelter, and clothing impact on social sustainability. Transparency and accountability are pending issues because of corruption, because of lack of sensitization, because of political interferences and the lack of clear management mechanisms. There are unarticulated policies on biodiversity and world heritage conservation. For example, sometimes they use unauthentic building materials for restoration. And this adds up when we consider that there is little or no monitoring and documentation. The local community could be more involved in the site management, or there is even a lack of stakeholder coordination, and there is sometimes not even a site management plan. To be honest and concise, there is an urgent need to review and update heritage policies. Financial capacity is still challenging. Actually, economic difficulties of locals result in illegal activities that damage the value of all heritage sites. And when it comes to tourism, the inclusive economic development is limited to selling of crafts and casual construction labors. Other challenges include lack of visitor infrastructure, lack of accessibility to the sites, not to mention bigger challenges such as the migration crisis and ongoing conflicts. Despite these challenges, we have some outstanding practices that are worth mentioning, such as the sprout of new urban planning and land management tools, which derive on transnational management plans, women empowerment, and strategies like ecotourism. The consideration of traditional processes in management systems, that's another good practice. The review of heritage legislation based on local narratives, which derives from a long process of decolonization of heritage and policies. In this process, senior local experts hand down tangible and intangible heritage like skills and rituals to younger generation. And this derives from the use of heritage by locals. What are the strategies or methods to achieve this? Well, through community projects and local participation that promote identity building and social cohesion, through income generating conservation projects like in urban development plans that take into account the protection of the site, or by improving visitor infrastructures, or by developing site management plans that include economic development for the local community, that also include visitor management, risk management, among others. This could also be achieved through administrative restructuration that consider international and private cooperation and support. It is also important to work on having a stable national funding. It's also important to work in awareness raising campaigns that address local challenges, to work also on capacity building to the staff and the local communities and all the other stakeholders involved in the site. And it is very important and urgent to revise and update heritage policies that include measures to mitigate the impacts of pollution, climate change, and the other challenges that I mentioned before. And actually, when we asked our case studies proponents, the local experts, if their perception of the sites had changed after we put them into a regional context, 100% said yes. And the way those perceptions change was on understanding the value of stakeholders' engagement. Of course, capacity building and stakeholder engagement should be the first step of many steps to follow. As stated yesterday by Professor Miquel Vidal, new challenges need new tools. And in Africa, there is a need of an all-round sustainable protection of the heritage sites, not only on paper, but in implementation, something that actually works in consultation and in benefit of the local communities. African world heritage is threatened by diverse factors, but efforts need to be made to sustain natural and cultural heritage for the benefit of all humanity. Dake, merci, thank you, asante sana, amasa genalo. Juliana, would you like to add something to what I said that I may have missed?
Pamela, thank you very much. No, it was very extensive and very complete. Your analysis. I would just like to highlight 2 points that you already had mentioned, and it's resource exploitation at the environmental level, because here I think it is important that we focus on the highest levels of the governance and how to not need to mitigate when we can just prevent the damages that this resource exploitation can bring. And here it's the collaboration, it's a global collaboration, because in many times state parties generally from the so-called developed states are contributing to the exploitation in countries in Africa. That's a very rich continent and with very many resources that could and are used by other countries also. So here, I think it's time to end up the hypocrisy that we see every day, that countries end up in agreement with exploitation strategies, at the same time also supporting and being heroes in mitigating the same damages that they are supporting by the other side. So this is, I think this is important for we to focus. Also, the next point, and to finish at the social level, as the social level is highly influenced by economic issues. So mitigating economic issues and challenges in Africa can and will influence very much the social issues that we have gone through. By the system, very positive point that I think we took from the regional workshop is that immaterial heritage in Africa, it has a central role, a very positive role, and will lead by example to the rest of the world in how immaterial heritage can and contributes very much to the conservation of material heritage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pamela and Juliana. I think it's so important. It's also one of the objectives of us doing this regional workshop, is to also highlight the positive good practices that we can see from these case studies. And it is also very important to think there has been quite some critical discussion about how World Heritage system can marginalize local communities, but it's also important to see how in a different way it can be a process of emancipation for local communities, which I think our expert will be the perfect person to talk about this. And let me just introduce her, Dr. Toki Lautan-Brown, and she is a heritage architect and cultural economist with emerging ecologies. She's an expert member on ICOMOS on cultural landscapes, and she's published on cultural heritage and marginalized heritage, and she has also a lot of experience in critical heritage research in Africa as well. So without further ado, Toki, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Glad to be called into this on a short notice. But I did enjoy all the conclusions and everything that we've done on Africa, which I thought was quite comprehensive. One of the things I always like to talk about is that the tangible and intangible is a little more than just that. It means different layers, you know, various cultural underpinnings, which is very part of the African belief system. So landscapes can evolve continually, biophysically, and transformationally. And it's important to understand that it is a process. And we always say from earth as birth, dust as death, incorporate spirituality, sacredness in its full entirety is also important. Memories embodied as a whole through events, activities, self-organizational patterns, which is also part of something that has been interrupted in Africa, especially the women's guilds. They were very powerful before colonization, and sort of coming back from colonization to self-organization patterns is becoming more evident with women's organizations in Africa. And so you can see that coming back. Spiritual places, structures, all of that is part of the whole African belief system. And of course, we know what happened in Africa. It's a continent that's based continually on communal regions, you know, so it's not just regional, it is communal, it goes back to the communities. And so when we say outstanding universal value, I have issues with that, because then we're speaking to a particular idea. But when we say our universal values, then for us as Africans, we understand that better, because now you're taking that back to the people, right? And so the stakeholders to create sustainability within African heritage sites, it needs to go back to the people. It has to be communal. It has to have economic value, which I'm very happy that was mentioned, because without that, you lose that custodian lore link to the land, which is what is important here. So the people need to understand that if funding is accessible, not just from foreign companies, not from outside, but from their national government, from their community council, that's also important, that the funding comes from the community council to the people, as it was done in days of old. So whatever resources the community has, the community shares, but that's the way it has always been. And so when you take that power away from the people and you take it to other people that are outside that community, you lose the economic, you lose the cultural, you lose the traditional value attached to a cultural heritage, which also includes the intangible activities as well, which is also the very essence of the community. And it's true about the intergenerational equity. You find that even when we do things like tacit knowledge, right? So tacit knowledge, it's passed down, it's from our memories, it's intertwined, and then it becomes practical. But when you lose all of that, because now there's unemployment, and so youths leave, you see a gap. There is a gap now, because the youths are leaving for urban areas, so they are leaving their communities. So it's becoming harder to pass that wealth of knowledge to the next generation, unless there's something so strong or so, of force that brings them back, that you see them going back to their communities and getting back into the whole circular system, which is, again, part of the African belief. I believe that once we change the way governance is done in the African continent, we will see a mind shift when it goes back to the community, which I think is also important. And you touched on, and so I'm going to give an example on a site that we're working on with Sucker Landscape in Nigeria. So it's all community engagement, participation. And so you see them going back to subsistence agriculture. So they're going back to the age-long terrace farming system of the landscape, which was ongoing before the interruption. We're seeing things change on the ground, especially when they take ownership, when they go back to their custodial laws. You see things, okay, commercial and marketing. There's a belief system that everything, because we have this word, we all say Ubuntu. I am because we are. So what that basically means that we all share in the resources. So maybe that's why you see this lack of commercial and marketing issues with the African continent, because it's a new concept. Capitalism is a new concept where they're mostly used to communal ways of doing things. So talking about profits or getting one over causes corruption. And this is why you see a lot of corruption. You see a lot of conflict because of the borders that have been divided due to the scramble for Africa and assigning country names to places. And so now cousins are in different parts of countries in Africa. It's difficult to understand the type of trauma this has created. And so when you begin to see a brother as an enemy because of the country they're living in, because it's not your country, then there's a problem. It goes way beyond those layers we're talking about. It's not visible, especially now there's mistrust. So if I'm from Nigeria and my cousin is from Cameroon, but we're cousins, is not highlighted, then you see there's a mistrust. Especially when now we're all talking about cultural heritage sites and everybody's seeing that as a way of making money, then all hell is broken loose, because now everybody is looking for what's in their own best interest, because now they have taken in that influence of in my own best interest as opposed to the communal best interest. And so going back to the community, I think is the best way to sustain cultural sites, especially intangible heritage within that site, because for us it's one and the same. You cannot call a cultural heritage site and forget the intangible and put that in a different category when it's the same thing, because whatever happens at Victoria Falls, it's also about healing. It's about going there to, perform spiritual rites. So all of that is important, and I'm glad that this is being talked about now, and I think it's important to highlight all of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Togi, for your comments. These are very critical issues for us to understand what is going on in Africa and what can go on in Africa in the future. Without further ado, we also are very happy to have two experts from ICOMOS and IUCN. I will introduce them very shortly, and we'll invite them to give us some comments after the session to conclude. So we have an ICOMOS expert, Gabriel Caballero. He is the focal point for the Sustainable Development Goals for ICOMOS and acts as the facilitator and coordinator for ICOMOS work in relation to the Global Sustainable Development Policy. And he coordinates the activities of the SDGs working group, develop ideas and monitors progress to support the implementation of the ICOMOS action plan for cultural heritage and localizing the Sustainable Development Goals. He's an expert member of the International Scientific Committee on Cultural Landscapes and specializes on sensitive landscape design and interventions. Without further ado, Gabriel, I'll give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it's been almost like 1 hour, 45 minutes, and it's we're still at it. But it's been a very interesting conversation, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I think it's great. I was here also yesterday, and as an observer, and I've been seeing all the different discussions. And it's as if we are traveling to different places. So we're going to the different, and today it's Asia Pacific, Latin America, and African region. But we're looking at all the different issues and the strengths of World Heritage Sites. Currently, as everyone probably knows, this is also the starting date of the World Heritage Committee meetings. And in the next 2 weeks, all these political movement and, all these sites that will be part of the family of World Heritage Sites that we're all discussing will be decided on. And it's good that we are all here in a way, it's a side event to that discussion, that other stakeholders are also conversing about the same issues. Mostly today, we're talking about sustainability, and it's not just UNESCO and the state parties and advisory bodies are looking at that. So I think it is a fantastic way of explaining that World Heritage is not just something that is political, and it's not just about discussion of, let's say, some people, but it is really about everyone. Now, I think I know that we are discussing about the coming 50 years of the convention, and it's really time to think about that when World Heritage and Sustainable Development is coming together. You know, it's we have, let's say, 2030 is our goal, and then the 2022 is our 50 years of the World Heritage Convention, right? And I think that it is also the right time for us to think about that, because when you imagine 1972, you know, the sites that have been inscribed to that list is probably one of the first one is the Abu Simbel site. It is very, very a different kind of phenomenon. It was meant to be saved because of a dam that was supposed to be created at that area. But now our sites are more complex. We have a lot more issues to deal with. And then we have also laid two more components to our sites, which is the impacts of climate change and, of course, COVID-19, which is affecting all of us. So there are a lot of points that have been provided. And I think that we should really have these kinds of conversations to move forward. The changing that is happening for our World Heritage sites are immense, and urbanization, and as I said, climate change is hitting every one of us. So different case studies that has been heard is a good starting point to have, let's say, one type of data that is collected in various types of regions. I want to go back to what Toki was saying earlier, but for me, the important thing here is that I'm a little bit afraid, to be honest, that we are going in a triangular perspective, but we are going from local to regional to global. But the real question of, is there really global perspectives? You know, each place is unique. Each place has its own strengths and weaknesses. And to synthesize that into a certain dot of a status of World Heritage might be a little bit problematic for me. But I'm here to say that I'm happy to listen to all the different perspectives from the regions. Going back to, it is good that we are having quantifiable data. But sometimes I feel that if we have quantifiable data, it reduces the quality of the things that we are discussing. The great works that are happening within the sites, we cannot just put them as let's say, numbers, but we should highlight the beauty of the things that are happening on the ground. And I think perhaps highlighting the benefits of World Heritage and how sites are sustainable will be a good thing to do. The other thing of what Toki was saying about our World Heritage, I think that is really a good point. But we also need to, for me, I mean, this is a personal perspective, that the idea of shared perspective can also change, right? So right now we have a shared perspective can be, there was a mention of economic driven perspectives, but in sometimes, let's say, there are other perspectives that needs to be highlighted, and that is what is described in the outstanding universal value. I know that I'll be the let's say, the person who will say, yes, we should pay importance to outstanding universal value, but also we have to see the benefits of that, because the outstanding universal value has come in from a certain level of thinking from the sites themselves, that is vetted through to global discussions, and it is the foundations of management plans. Now, I know that it is quite political in its nature, but we also have to think that there is a crux of, let's say, conservation that it provides. A couple of weeks ago, I had a workshop somewhere in a regional workshop with site managers and focal points, and then we had a question of what is your site's outstanding universal value, and a lot of the members of the site managers did not actually know what the OUV was, and which means that it is a little bit more difficult for them to see what needs to be managed. Now, if there is a notion of a shared perspective of what needs to be managed, then management systems are a little bit easier to deal with. And of course, when we don't know what we're managing, it's also saying that, okay, we're stopping ourselves from many decisions because there are certain things that we don't know what we cannot control, and there are things that are beyond our control, you know. So I think it is quite important that we, in World Heritage Sites, that we are familiar with these concepts of outstanding universal value and also the management systems that can come with it. And then, of course, the priorities of what is the important thing. Is it economics? Is it about environmental values? Is it about, you know, natural heritage sites? Primarily are natural values. We have to see that we are preserving a site because of their inherent beauty, of their biodiversity, and the economic values of that is secondary to that kind of globalized protection. I know that we have colleagues from the environmental side that will also discuss that, but I hope that we see that. I also want to share what Mo has said about leadership. You know, leadership, I agree, needs to be done from the top, but also the voices of the site managers and the people at the bottom saying that this is how we should do things, and it's like bringing people together and say that we have a way of dealing with the different situations from different fronts, but we also have to have that kind of communication that says what does a site manager need and versus what does let's say the Ministry of Culture define as what is important to them. So communication is key in these conversations. So I think the last point, I also echo what Alfredo was saying about theory is important, but it needs to go to practice. We're here today, we've gathered different points of perspectives from academics and public institutions, but I think it's for the next, let's say, 50 years to come, the local voices and the stakeholders that are on the ground are people that we have to speak with. We have to go beyond what we know and also discuss what are the important values that are important to the sites from a site manager's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle, for the very thorough comment. And last but not least, and thank you very much for your patience, we have an IUCN expert, Dr. Nabath Gaza Aswa. I hope I didn't bomb your name too much. He's an expert from the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas, and he's been very active in the conservation and awareness activities of the EU Live Egyptian Vulture New Life project in the Middle East, which you can see from his background as well. And he has been working a lot on environmental protection, conservation issues in the Middle East, particularly in Syria as well. So without further ado, Mr. Nabath, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Louis, for that presentation and for the introduction. Hopefully you can hear me. Thank you. So thank you for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to present some of the ideas, and just to add some points a little bit. To be honest, this session was an eye-opening opportunity for myself. I learned a lot, and I just expand my expectation and interpretation of the importance of this important topic for future cooperation, like to implement better means for site conservation for various reasons, not only for biological conservation, but also for things beyond that. To consider, like World Heritage Sites are usually attributed mostly like on a national level, like a site of have an importance on the national attributes. But World Heritage Site, it's not just belong to one country or one region. It belongs to region. It belongs to the globe at all. It's have some significance for conservation beyond the political borders. I would say it's everybody will benefit. The human will do that to expand our reach of our conservation aims in general for that aspect. As has been highlighted today and yesterday, global World Heritage sites cannot be considered as a site of importance on a long basis for cultural and heritage site, but it also has to be considered also as integrating other aspects. The human factor is an important issue, as has been said from Toki's talk in Africa. It is the common values, the common attribute from people, from the tribes there. It's very important. So we have to take that on board. And we have to look at the past experience through the present knowledge and into the future and apply that hopefully for the site protection. And that will be benefit also for more integration for the biological aspect into conservation. And that can be bent from doing a cultural site or like a careful study for a site on that aspect. However, all activities and all action that aim for protection and conservation of sites should be taken as with the SDGs. All related SDGs should be aligned with our goals of our activities. Just to add some flavor to the locals, some flavor to the economics, some flavor to the aspect of conservation, and attract more attention for conservationists and for protection to the efforts to be in line in one kind united word. So if we are talking about activities in this line, I would say from one experience, from talking about the experience from the Syrian Society of Conservation of Wildlife, which is a member of BirdLife International and a member of the International Union of Conservation of Nature, IUCN. The Syrian Society as an NGO, national NGO, has worked mainly first of all as a conservation to continue its approach for conserve apply conservation measures in areas inside to attract some, but it has expanded its attribute, its work to integrate more things to get some important, some benefit to the local, to the livelihood of the local people in those sites. And when linking that activities of the conservation for the livelihood, that will benefit the conservation itself, and that will conservation the site itself. So there is many aspects you can link together, to link the cultural aspect and to link the biological aspect. I would say to think the cultural and the historical aspects in some sites, not every site, with the conservation and biological aspect to get benefit for the current and hopefully for future conservation activities. It is, I would say, that will benefit the local people, local biodiversity in general, and support the local people in their traditional and their cultural activity and their cultural aspect in the life. Similarly, if you're looking at the criteria, or if we look at the criteria of establishing World Heritage Site, the criteria, according to IUCN now, it has been one of the criteria to adopt site for conservation. according to IUCN measures, it's some feature related to World Heritage Site. So again, that stresses on the importance of this combination of like biodiversity, biological factors with cultural and historical factors just for conservation. So that will give you as an added value for the future, for the attract more attention for conservation work in any aspect of any area. And that has been highlighted by the talk we heard today from people from all the globe and from yesterday as well. So it is kind of very important things. This idea is a cornerstone, I would say, in the IUCN programs adopted in this and just being adopted in their strategies that's in developing. Being like a member of the commission in IUCN and having like working with BirdLife International as a conservation officer. One of the aims was to conserve some endangered biodiversity, endangered species. So this is applied for, as I said, in different organizations on the national and international level, such as BirdLife International. So I would take just as an example how we integrate that of conservation. As you said, Louis, from my background, I'm working in the Egyptian cultural conservation. So this species has been endangered, considered as endangered for almost 30 years now. But it's a species deep rooted in the history. So we have to look in my work in coordinating this conservation work in the Middle East, we noticed that it was one of the vulture species that has been like embedded in the history since the Egyptian ancient time, since the pharaohs. It was mentioned and showed on a lot of scriptures in temples, on the pyramids and everything there. It was mentioned in the Egypt, from the Middle East into the Balkan as well, that's beyond the borders. So, so that's give us an idea, just to have some more discussion and some more like work to get some ideas about how to conserve that species. So we looked in the past, we looked at the history of this species, how it is roaming in the skies of the region, how it is migrating into the region between area and area, and what attributes that people in those areas were looking at that species in particular. So the history of this species, the past of this species, into the presence of the threat that the species is facing into this region, led us to some kind of ideas of interpretation to take some practices to implement it today in our activities to protect this species. Like we learned from the remarks of the some description or some ideas as described by civilization in another belief, the central use it as for some to do with medicine, but it is like a belief. So it is kind of activities that open our eyes that this is some one of the causes that we have to tackle to preserve and conserve these species and protect it in the future. So we have to do like to reach this outcome, we have to do some anthropological study from the sites of this project, and just to get some information and some ideas how to get some information to or some practices to alleviate that threat that species is facing in the region. So it is kind of like activities just to integrate biological aspect with the cultural and the tradition knowledge on those sites of conservation, just to use it as a factor, as a recipe for conservation and for protecting these species for the future. And that would be very similar for the development of the activities on the future, hopefully for the species, and that's for similar species. I don't want to go further, and for a long time, I know we are behind schedule, so we are a little bit running of time, but I would say with the presenter and to the kind of what we heard from, especially from that's been seen in South America and in Africa, and how they strive hard to tackle these issues, and how to integrate some other aspect, just add some to the some aspect for conservation beyond just the cultural one, so to have some more benefit for that aspect. So we have to just to concentrate on and open our eyes and concentrate more on our national level, and go beyond our borders into regional and even the global level, to cooperate for conservation activity and conservation for different active and aspects. It was as was that said by this case study, wonderful case study, I would say that we need more governance to do and revise these governance. We need to update our management plan, more regular management plan for those sites for the future. So but we have to also to consider other aspects, as being said earlier by Gabrielle. So there is multi-factors, multi-features that have to be integrated. Biological aspect has to be integrated as well into conservation. Hence, I would say that site protection will benefit the biological conservation, and that vice versa, biological conservation itself for some site will give some benefit for site protection likewise. So it's many things I have to say, but I don't want to go further and repeat some things. But I would say thank you for everybody, and thank you for the opportunity just to do that. And for protecting the site, I just want to conclude that the benefit from protecting site, it's us human as well. It is us will benefit. If we protect our site, the local people will benefit, the biodiversity will benefit, everybody will benefit. Everybody is a win-win situation. Nobody will lose anything. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I hope that I didn't get too long. Thank you very much again.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Nabath, for your comments. It's certainly, I think, from the regional workshops that we have done, it's very obvious to us that as humans, being in the world is not just isolated within our human society, it's always connected with the nature and other species and our environment. And we have some questions from the audience, and I am sure that everyone's buzzing with questions and discussions as well. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I would just suggest you all to bring your reflection and your questions to our plenary session on the 24th, as you can see here. We also have further activities in the coming week. Please do join us as well and bring your insight and interact with us. And I just want to thank everyone, all the presenters, all the guest experts, and also our very hardworking sustainability team behind the scene, making all of this happen. And I don't know, Jana, do you want to conclude? And
yes, I would like to conclude. Yeah. I'm sorry, I have a power cut. As you see, the whole university campus is in the dark. So I'm going to just, I first of all like to thank Louis for her brilliant moderation and Maria for an impeccable background support. I would like to especially thank our guest experts, Gabriel Caballero and Nabeg Ghazal Assad, for their expert commentary. Thank you so much. I'm most grateful to our regional guest experts for their very valuable comments and inputs, and this process is incomplete without their inputs. Moe Chiba for Asia and the Pacific, thank you for working with me on this, Moe. Toki Lautan Brown for Africa region. Toki, thank you for saving the day. And Alfredo Conti for Latin America, and that was brilliant suggestions and your feedback. I would like to thank my fellow regional coordinators, Ruben Pesky, Pamela Durand-Jures, and supported by Juliana for their brilliant synthesis of the outcomes. And not to forget Luna Rajab for organizing the part 1 of the conclusions and so amazingly, and for her support behind conclusions 2 as well. I would like to thank the team sustainability convener, Lucia Pesky, for her energy level, and she's absolutely non-stoppable. Would like to thank our wonderful interpreters, Florencia and Marisa. Would like to especially thank coordinator of sustainable team, Ege Yildirim. I would like to thank Anna Paula for taking care of the websites and taking a whole lot of load off us. The entire sustainability team of our World Heritage for your support and a reminder that together we can shape the future of World Heritage. Last but not the least, Flacum platform for making it possible and for very generously giving us this platform. And Mike, the creative mind behind it all. Finally, to all participants for being there with us thus far through our journey, and we continue this debate. And as Pamela has shared, that we continue this debate and would like to inform you that we are live on July 22nd, July 23rd, and July 24th is where the case studies plenary discussion will be taking place. Then July 30th, integrating of the regional recommendations. I will take a moment to announce our World Heritage Voices. Our World Heritage Voices is an initiative of our World Heritage, and we welcome your participation in our OWH Voices. It's an experimental forum that allows people and organizations to share information and viewpoints on the state of conservation of the World Heritage Sites. Please find more info on www.owhvoices.org. With this, I close the session, and I once again thank you all so very much, and thank you for all your support and brilliant presentations and commentary and support. And thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
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 Hope to see you all on 24th.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Moy. Hope to see
Good
you
night.
on 24th, Moy.
I'll try.
Gracias a todos.
Bye-bye.
Okito. Done.
Done. Ruben is still here.
I gotta go. Bye, guys.
Yeah, okay,
Talk
bye-bye.
later.
Thank you so much. Brilliant.